4 days before the decisive negotiations, Saela, the young ruler, was forced to accept a human bodyguard named Vale. By then, an attempt on her life was already being prepared inside her palace. What remained was to understand what Mark's blunt prohibitions and breaches of protocol meant. Several days of discreet protection, or the far too precise knowledge of a man familiar with the craft of regicide. The answer would lie not only in what he did, but in a specific confession about his past. Oren placed the certified delegation list before Saela. Mark's name was already beside hers, as a mandatory condition imposed by the neutral guarantors. They had declared Saela's own guard politically compromised. Refusal meant exclusion from the negotiations. Replacing the outside specialist would require 5 days of fresh approvals. They had 4. Saela read the humiliating wording once more, then looked up at the man by the door. Oren, find another outside bodyguard, immediately. She said it in front of Mark on purpose. He made no attempt to defend his appointment. Instead, he took the ceremonial chair prepared beside the rulers and moved it against the wall. Settle the matter of my appointment without me, but I will not sit where I cannot see who comes in. Saela moved the chair back herself. Until you are replaced, you will follow my orders. The ones that leave you alive? It sounded less like a promise than a claim to disobedience declared in advance. Saela's palace steward hurriedly listed the permitted routes: the main doors, the inner gallery, the small hall, and the service exit, which he called my lady's alternate route. Mark turned to him. Say that again. The service passage, the steward corrected himself quickly. A slip of the tongue, the preparations, all the confusion. The captain of the guard irritably confirmed that the courtiers were always mixing up the old names and the new ones. Mark asked nothing else. He merely kept his eyes on the steward, as if noting how quickly my lady's alternate route had become the service passage again. To everyone else, it was still a service passage, but someone in the palace had already begun calling it Saela's route. At the public rehearsal, the servants filled the ceremonial cups from a single vessel and handed them to the participants one by one. Saela was to take the first sip, confirming that the table was safe for her guests. She had already raised the cup to her lips when Mark caught her wrist and struck the underside of her hand. The cup shattered on the step below the throne. The hall fell silent. You have just disrupted a mandatory ritual, Saela said. Mark was looking at the shards. There were no beads of condensation on the other cups. There were on yours. And the servant held it by the stem through his sleeve. The servant went pale, but answered at once. My hands are hot. I did not want to warm my lady's drink. There was no way to test the cup now. The liquid had spread across the step, mixing with traces of incense and the water used to wipe down the floor. The captain of the guard found nothing but a breach of ceremony. The courtiers saw a foreigner seize their ruler in front of her entire retinue. Saela saw something else as well. Mark could not have known what was in the cup. He had destroyed the only possible evidence along with it. An hour later, they were walking through a narrow gallery above the inner courtyard. A ceremonial attendant approached them carrying a bowl of scalding tar. Saela moved to the right to let him pass. The attendant moved the same way. She returned to the center. He adjusted his path again. Mark saw the attendant's free hand tense. He was looking neither at Saela nor at the bowl, but at the low parapet behind her. Mark seized Saela by the belt, pulled her aside and switched places with her. The hot tar splashed past her face but caught her wrist duff. Pain burned all the way to her shoulder. Saela drew a sharp breath, but the attendant kept moving. His shoulder struck the spot where she had stood a moment before. Only then did he drop the bowl and stagger back with a frightened cry. Forgive me, I lost my footing. Mark silently pointed to the even flagstones beneath his feet, but there had been no fall, nor was there a confession. All that remained was the burn on Saela's wrist and the thrust of the attendant's shoulder, which he had failed to stop even after his target was gone. Do not touch me again without permission, Saela said as the physician covered the burn with a bandage. You are responsible for protecting me, but my body does not belong to you. Find a way to obey both parts of that order. Mark accepted the restriction without argument. At the end of the gallery, he stopped beside a service door that had been thought jammed for years. A thin streak of fresh wax gleamed along the bottom track. The floors were polished before the negotiations, the cleaner explained. Some wax reached the threshold. Mark crouched down. On the surface of the floor, the streak almost disappeared. Inside the groove, however, it ran far beneath the door. Mark rose without a word. Outside the petitioner's hall, Mark found 2 new attendants. Their names appeared on the day's roster, but that morning, 2 other men had been at those posts. The captain of the palace guard could not explain the change. "The meeting is cancelled," Mark said. No, representatives of the border communities were waiting beyond the doors. Saela herself had promised to hear them before the negotiations, and the temporary truce rested on that promise. If I send a counselor in my place, the court will once again demand that they risk their lives while I hide from danger in my own house. After that, I will have no right to ask for their trust. And if the new attendants lead you into an ambush, there will be no one left to make demands. Then find a way to hold the meeting. You are here to protect the ruler, not relieve her of her duties. Mark studied her for several seconds, then inspected the hall and both attendants. He left one outside and positioned the other where he could not get close to Saela. He ordered the exit kept open. Then he followed her inside without touching her. It was the first order from Saela that he carried out not in defiance of her decision, but within it. The cost of that balance became clear later that same day. The head of a delegation that had not yet chosen a side in the negotiations entered the ceremonial circle. Custom required Saela to meet him at its center. The guest took a step toward her, and Mark moved between them. "The greeting is over." He said it loudly enough for the entire court to hear. The head of the delegation froze. Then he bowed to Saela with flawless coldness and declined the private meeting scheduled for that evening. It had been her only chance to secure his agreement before the general negotiations. "You eliminated a convenient opportunity for an attack," Saela said when they were alone. "And at the same time, you branded a guest I need as a suspect. I am not required to make a dangerous approach look courteous. You are required to understand exactly what you are saving. My life without a truce or allies has consequences too." Mark did not apologize. "Then you tell me the political cost in advance. I decide whether the distance can be allowed." "No. We decide what price will actually have to be paid." The next day, Saela found him in the ceremonial gallery. Mark hooked the edge of the runner with his boot and shifted it half a pace toward the inner wall. "The servants cannot lay a carpet straight," he said. The master of ceremonies flushed crimson. The center line had been measured to perfection for generations. "Put it back," Saela demanded. "You will not walk down the center." Next, Mark ordered the hall's inner doors taken off their hinges. They were normally locked as soon as the ruler entered, shutting the ceremony away from the bustle of the palace. "An open doorway will be seen as another insult to proper order," Saela said. "Locked doors are unacceptable to me." She looked at the broken line of the procession, then at the servants already holding the first heavy door. "Until the negotiations are over. After that, the doors go back and the runner is laid straight again. And from now on, before you tear apart my arrangements, you explain what it will cost me." Mark nodded. The doors came down. The runner remained by the wall. One of the heavy doors slipped from the servants' hands as they removed it from its hinges and crashed down a few paces from Saela. The guards closed ranks around the ruler. Everyone was staring at the splintered edge of the door. The servants responsible, or Saela herself. Everyone except Mark. Saela followed his gaze. The master of ceremonies stood motionless. The crash had not made him flinch. He reacted a moment later when he saw Saela unharmed behind the guards. She did not tell Mark she had noticed. A delay like that could mean anything. But now Saela was watching more than the cause of the commotion. During the next rehearsal in the inner courtyard, a taut rope snapped. An ornament struck the stone. Heads turned toward the sound. Saela watched the people. One member of the delegation looked first at the designated evacuation door. Only then did he feign the same surprise as everyone else. Mark did not notice him. He noticed where Saela was looking. Neither of them called what they had seen evidence. Later, while the arriving retinues were being checked, Mark stopped beside her. "Your uncle's steward just passed a palace ribbon to one of the chancellor's attendants." Saela found them both in the crowd. The chancellor's man was already fastening the borrowed ribbon beneath a fold of his clothing. "With that, he can enter as one of your uncle's servants," Mark said. "We can take him now." "No," Mark turned to her. "Since the execution of the chancellor's daughter, those houses have not helped each other. Their servants are forbidden even to accept water from one another. That handoff could only have been arranged. That changed what it meant. If they detained the man carrying the ribbon, the others involved would know the exchange had been seen. The passes issued to both retinues would remain valid. and the borrowed ribbon would disappear before the guards learned who else had been promised one. "Revoke access for both retinues," Saela said. "No accusations. Everyone who enters receives new personal authorization." Mark was already summoning the captain of the guard. "Detain no one. The old ribbons are no longer valid. Both retinues will be screened again, one person at a time." Both houses protested at once. Saela's uncle demanded to know who was suspected. The chancellor called the blanket screening an insult. Saela refused them both. Mark sealed the entrances, but he did not let the guards pin the blame on the first frightened servant they found. When the hall was empty, he said, "I would have taken the man with the ribbon, and left them everyone else." Yes. That brief admission meant more than praise. "After the negotiations, I still intend to have you replaced," Saela said. "Until then, it is enough that you keep watching where no one else does." She did not argue. There was still no trust between them, but for the first time, Mark was no longer the only one who could see the palace around Saela. On the eve of the negotiations, Saela's mentor asked the servants 3 times which door the ruler would use to enter and who would walk beside her. Not once did she ask Saela herself what she feared or what she intended to say. Mark forbade them from being alone together. Saela allowed her mentor to see her only with a witness present. An hour later, Saela's palace steward laid his token of access on the table before the entire court. "Either lift the restriction by your own word, my lady, or accept my resignation." Saela pushed the token back toward him. "You will keep your position, and you will follow the same rule as everyone else. Until the negotiations are over, no one in my retinue is to be alone with me without a witness present." Mark had no authority to question these people. The hereditary servants answered to the ruler and the council, while he remained a temporary outsider. A single accusation without evidence would give the council lawful grounds to remove him from Saela's side. "Then we won't ask them to confess," Mark said. "We'll give them information that will no longer be of any use." "And what will that prove? The information itself? Nothing. What matters will be any attempt to restore the old arrangement." Saela agreed to consider only a specific change. She would not hand him control of the court or allow him to command her people as he saw fit. One route, one departure time, and several positions named in advance. First, Mark went to the secretary of the neutral guarantors. He brought the number of the only unused emergency route change form, which Saela had marked with her personal seal when he was first appointed. Oren had entered the document in the register at the time. The form allowed Mark to change her route only once, if a sudden threat prevented the ruler from giving the order herself. The human had no other certified forms, nor did he have Saela's seal dot. On the control copy bearing the same number, Mark wrote in his own hand what change he intended to make and what response he expected it to provoke. He did not show the text to Saela. "You're asking me to trust a sealed document?" she asked. "No, I'm asking you not to trust my explanations after the fact." He folded the sheet with the writing inside. The secretary added the date and placed his seal across the fold beside Mark's. The sealed packet remained in the guarantor's archive. Altering or replacing even a single word would require breaking both seals. Only then did Saela summon her inner retinue. The hereditary keeper of the ceremonial cloak barely looked at the ruler, but whenever the arrangements changed without warning, she watched to see who remained by the doors. Mark named her and Saela's elderly lady's maid, who had dressed the ruler for years. Replace the keeper. Add the lady's maid to the ceremonial list. The representative of the ancient house went pale. "An outsider cannot strip me of my hereditary duty." "He cannot," Saela replied. "That is why the decision is mine." She approved the replacement. Formally, only one name on the list had changed. But with the position, the keeper also lost the right to enter the locked dressing room before the ruler's departure. Then Saela turned to Oren. "During the procession, you will take the position by the inner door." That was where the steward had been expected to stand. He would keep his position, but at the appointed hour, he would have to be elsewhere in the retinue. Mark filled out the certified form with the actual departure time, a different gallery, and the routine notation for a change of escort. No accusations, no explanations. He personally handed the sheet to the steward, waited while he checked the number against the register, and changed nothing else. The new arrangement took effect. The mentor, the steward, and the keeper remained in the palace, retained their freedom of movement, and were not named as suspects. But the route, timing, and placement of people they knew were now useless. A sealed record was already in the archive, stating what was to happen if anyone tried to restore the previous arrangement. The first move no longer belonged to Mark. The order to remove Mark from Saela's private wing arrived several hours after the route was changed. The sheet bore Saela's seal, a number from the palace register, and the duty secretary's mark. The messenger gave the correct confirmation phrase. Mark read the order and remained by the door. "Leave the wing," Oren demanded, "or I will order the guard to remove you. First, the ruler will tell me so herself. If every subordinate starts verifying her orders with her personally, the palace will cease to function." Oren was right. Every sign of a lawful order was there. That was precisely why, when Saela entered the room, she did not ask why Mark had disobeyed. She asked who had seen her sign the sheet. No one had. "I gave no such order," she said. Oren suggested removing Mark for insubordination instead. Saela looked at the flawless seal. By keeping the man beside her, she might be allowing someone involved in the threat to remain close. By removing him, she would be submitting to those who had already learned to speak in her official voice. "Mark stays until the negotiations are over. But from this moment on, no order issued in my name is to be carried out without my personal confirmation. And you, Mark, will no longer give orders in my name without my express consent. Understood." The next morning, he ordered the partition he had previously demanded be removed, returned to the ceremonial hall. The servants restored it to its former position. Once again, it blocked the view of the area by the inner wall. Mark walked around the partition and said loudly, "The arrangement is correct now. Change nothing else." The servants spread word of his approval faster than any order. After the public inspection, Saela closed the hall for one final walkthrough. Only she, Mark, and the neutral guard remained. On the side facing the wall, Mark removed 2 decorative plates, turned the lower retaining pins 1 full turn, and replaced the decorations. From inside the hall, there was no way to see that anything had been altered. "Once weight is put against it, the entire partition will fall," he said quietly. "And if the pins jam? You will be standing beside the blind spot I restored myself. What if they come out sooner? The partition will collapse in front of the guests, and whoever is watching the preparations will know we interfered." Mark made no attempt to call the risk acceptable. Saela herself left the fastenings loosened. By the far wall, servants were already preparing to tighten the sagging tapestry. Mark sent them away. He left the 2 upper hooks hanging from a single turn of the fastening loops instead of 3, then concealed them beneath the trim. Then he led Saela to the hanging cords and pointed to the one on the left. "When you hear the command, left cord, act. That is not an action. Tear it free with 1 sharp pull. How long do I wait after the command? Not at all. Even if I am occupied, even if what is happening seems like a mistake to you." Saela took hold of the cord, making sure she would not confuse it with the other in haste, then released it. 1 pull. No waiting, but the decision to obey your command will be mine. Mark put the trim back in place. The partition looked secure again, and the tapestry firmly fastened. The hall was ready for the negotiations, and that was exactly how it needed to look to whoever was watching the preparations. Before the final rite, the keepers of the pact showed Saela the ancient table. A narrow recess along its edge was too deep for anyone to see the plate inside. By custom, the ruler was required to remove her glove, slide her hand in as far as it would go, and press the plate with her palm. Only then could the parties sign. The last authorized servicing of the table had been carried out the day before. The keepers had painted a stroke of lacquer across the seam of the recess, and the neutral secretary had taken a dated impression. On the paper, the 2 halves of the stroke aligned perfectly. Saela had already extended her bare hand when Mark placed the impression beside the seam. On the table, 1 half of the lacquer line had shifted by the width of a fingernail. "The plate was removed after the inspection," he said. The keeper of the rite objected that the old wood could have shifted with the change in temperature. The delegates began exchanging glances. Opening the table would mean interrupting the ceremony and publicly casting doubt on the neutral keepers. Walking away now would mean losing the agreement at the very moment when all that remained was to confirm it. "Do you know what is inside?" Saela asked. "No." "Then tell me my options. refuse the rite, or repeat the motion with something other than your hand. Saela looked at the ceremonial stylus prepared for the signing. A reservoir of crimson ink showed dark inside its transparent shaft. Guide it along the exact path my palm would take, and press the plate. Mark slowly inserted the stylus into the recess. No one in the hall moved. The tip reached the inner wall. Mark pressed down. A thin poison shard shot out through the lower slit. It struck where Saela's palm should have been, pierced the shaft, and snapped the stylus in two. The ink capsule burst. Crimson droplets splashed across the fingers Saela had curled around the edge of the table. She jerked her hand back. The marksman hidden beyond the far gallery could not see the recess or the broken stylus dot. He saw only her sudden movement and the red stain. The shot came at once. The bolt struck the back of the empty ceremonial chair. The guests rushed for the walls. The guards closed around Saela, and an official command rang out from the corridor. "Take the ruler to the standard exit. Now!" The guards turned toward the usual evacuation door. Mark stepped into their path. Not that way. The captain of the guard ordered him to clear the way, but Mark did not even look at him. The service door at the end of the gallery opened without a sound. Fresh wax in the old groove let it glide open easily and silently. A man carrying a short weapon stepped through. He made no attempt to hide. He raised his arm so the entire hall could see him. The palace guards rushed at him. Two of the men shielding Saela seized her by the elbows and dragged her toward the standard exit. Mark drove his shoulder into the first, swept the second to the floor, and slammed the door shut directly in front of Saela. "You're taking her exactly where they forced you to." A heavy blow already sounded from behind the door. Someone was waiting on the other side. Mark turned Saela around and pushed her not away from the visible gunman, but toward the center of the hall. 3 guards already had the attacker pinned to the floor there. The most obvious danger had become the one place the conspirators no longer controlled. A hidden catch clicked inside a carved wall panel. Mark ducked Saela in time. A narrow blade flew over her shoulder and struck the stone. It crossed the center line of the passage, where the ceremonial runner had lain until the day before. Saela was no longer on the new route, shifted toward the inner wall. Behind her, the 2 escorts Mark had just knocked down got back to their feet. One grabbed the edge of her cloak. The other reached for her belt, trying to turn her back toward the standard exit. Mark was too far away. Guests, guards, and overturned chairs churned between them. "The left cord!" he shouted. Saela spotted the familiar braid by the wall. The exit was only a few steps away. The hand gripping her cloak pulled her back. She did not wait for Mark, and she did not run where they were steering her. Saela tore the cord free with a single pull. The upper loops sprang from their hooks. The heavy tapestry crashed across the hall, struck the outstretched arm, and fell between Saela and the false escorts. The first became tangled in the fabric. The second tried to go around it, but lost several seconds. Those seconds were enough. Saela crossed the open doorway where the removed inner doors had once stood. A palace guard unit coming from the opposite direction entered the hall without delay. There was nothing left to seal the ruler inside with her attackers. The man by the restored partition realized it before anyone else. He stepped out of the blind spot and threw his weight against the panel, trying to block the guard's path. The weakened pins slipped from their sockets. The partition could not bear his weight and collapsed in one piece. He was left exposed, weapon in hand. The guards brought him down before he could reach Saela. Others bound the decoy gunman and sealed the door leaf that had been opened without a sound. Another man was detained beyond the usual exit. No one had to turn the hall into a battlefield. One by one, the attackers lost their position, their escape route, or the crucial second they needed. Amid the stream of evacuees, the junior master of ceremonies confidently led 2 frightened guests toward Saela's private passage. He hurried them forward all the way to the door. Then he saw Oren, standing where the former steward should have been. The master of ceremonies did not ask him to let the guests through, nor did he show any surprise at the change. He immediately abandoned them both, turned around, and pushed against the flow, trying to blend in with another retinue. Oren blocked his path. "You knew who was supposed to be waiting at this passage." The man said nothing. He was detained, but Saela refused to let his silence be called a confession, or his knowledge of the old access arrangements, proof that he had led the conspiracy. When the last armed man was on the floor, Saela looked across the hall, at the broken stylus, at the blade that had struck along the carpet's former path, At the open doorway with no doors, the fallen partition, and the tapestry beneath which the false escorts were still being restrained. No single precaution would have saved her on its own. For several days, Mark had been changing the route, the positions, and the familiar reactions the killers intended to exploit. But at the decisive moment, he himself had not been near the cord. Saela broke the final link between the false evacuation and the ambush. The assassination attempt had been thwarted. The attackers were in the guards' hands, and it was clear that someone had known the palace routes and security procedures in advance. But none of the detainees named the person who had brought them together as part of a single plan, and the aftermath of the attack revealed nothing about its political purpose. While the detainees were being inventoried, Oren personally cut open the gunman's inner pocket. A note folded into quarters fell from the lining. The neutral secretary picked it up, entered the discovery into the official record, and only then unfolded the sheet. The author named no names. The instructions were to wait for first blood, raise the alarm after the shot, and drive Saela toward the alternate route. A separate line gave orders concerning the men beyond the usual exit. That exact sequence had already played out in the hall, and the name used for the passage matched the phrase Saela's palace steward had let slip on the first day. The note belonged to the current assassination attempt, but neither the handwriting nor the paper revealed who had given the orders. The Saela demanded the packet Mark had left with the guarantors. The secretary checked the control copy number and the date, 3 days before the attack. The seals across the fold were still intact. The packet was opened in Oren's presence. Mark had written in advance that after the attendant was replaced, someone would try to restore the original arrangement. Beside it was a brief note, "Empty funeral." The secretary unfolded the shooter's note again. The same phrase referred to the rehearsal after which the servant who had carried out the test was to be eliminated. It was not a palace expression, nor was it used by the regular guard. Mark had known the conspirators' internal name for that stage of the preparations before they began to act openly. Saela did not thank him. "Name a verifiable source for what you know." Mark looked at both notes. "My former personal file contains 7 plans I devised for assassinating rulers. I carried out one of them myself." He named neither the victim nor the client. And now, Saela knew only one thing for certain. She had been saved by a man who had once carried such an assassination through to the end.